I'm Abigail Parker, 34. A finance manager in Indianapolis, always putting out fires at work. But nothing prepared me for the blaze waiting at my dad's 55th birthday party. I rushed to the upscale restaurant downtown, already late from a client crisis. The place was buzzing, but when I walked in, my family was done eating plates. Cleared wine glasses empty. My mom slid a bill across the table, $5,500. My jaw dropped. Before I could speak, my older brother smirked. "That's for you, Abby." The table erupted in laughter, my parents, my brother, even the cousins, everyone but me. I stared at the bill, my hands shaking, their chuckles echoing like a bad joke. They'd ordered the priciest steaks, the fanciest wine, knowing I'd show up late. I was their go-to fixer, the one who always paid. But this time, something snapped. I didn't just see a bill. I saw years of their demands piling up: car repairs, medical bills, my brother's endless business ventures. I wanted to scream, but instead I pushed the bill back. Their laughter stopped. I walked out heart-pounding, knowing this was just the start. A few weeks later, things got worse, way worse. If you've ever felt like your family's personal bank, hit that like button, subscribe, and share your story in the comments. Trust me, you'll want to hear what happened next. Growing up in a worn-out house in Indianapolis, I always felt like the family fixer. Our two-story home on the edge of the city had peeling paint, a leaky roof, and a furnace that groaned louder than my father's complaints. My father, Henry, was a truck driver until his knees gave out at 50, forcing him to retire early. He'd spend his days in a recliner, scrolling through cable channels, grumbling about bills. My mother, Betty, worked long shifts at a supermarket, ringing up groceries with a tired smile. Then there was my older brother, Daniel, 36, still living in our parents' basement, chasing dreams as a freelance graphic designer, but never landing steady gigs. I was the odd one out. The only one who made it to college, got a finance degree, and landed a solid job as a finance manager. That success came with a price. It started small. A few years back, my father called, saying his hospital visit for a knee scan cost $2,000. I wired the money, thinking it was a one-time thing. Then my mother needed $500 for a new fridge when theirs died. I covered that too. Daniel was the worst, always pitching some new business idea. I bought him a $1,500 laptop to launch his career, only for him to spend most of his time gaming. The biggest hit was $3,000 for a new roof after a storm tore through our street. I didn't mind helping at first. They were family, and I felt like I owed them for getting me through college, though I'd paid my own way with scholarships and part-time jobs. But the requests never stopped. Every month it was something new: a car repair, a utility bill, or another of Daniel's investments. My bank account was bleeding, and I barely had savings left. I'd lie awake at night, my stomach in knots, wondering how I'd cover my own rent if I kept bailing them out. My father would call, his voice heavy with guilt. "Trips, Abby. You're doing so well, can't you help your old man out?" My mother was subtler, dropping hints about how family sticks together. Daniel didn't bother with guilt. He'd just text, "Yo, Abby, spot me a few hundred." I hated saying no. Every time I tried, their disappointed sighs or sharp comments made me feel like the selfish one. The worst part: they never asked how I was doing. My job was brutal: long hours, endless client demands, but they didn't care. To them, I was a walking checkbook, the one who'd always say yes. I started dreading their calls, my phone buzzing like a warning signal. I'd check my bank balance, obsessively watching my dreams of buying a house slip further away. Once I mentioned to my mother that I was saving for a down payment. She just laughed and said, "Oh, Abby, you'll get there someday after you help us with the electric bill." It stung, but I still sent the money. I wasn't sleeping well anymore. My boss, noticing my distraction, pulled me aside and asked if everything was okay. I brushed it off, but inside I was crumbling. I wanted to tell them to stop, to figure out their own problems, but the guilt was suffocating. What kind of daughter, what kind of sister says no to family? I kept telling myself I could handle it, that I'd find a way to balance their needs with mine. But deep down, I knew something had to give. I couldn't keep being their safety net forever. But everything truly exploded on my dad's 55th birthday. I was stuck at work untangling a client's mess. A major account had gone haywire, and I spent hours on the phone calming an irate investor while my inbox overflowed. By the time I glanced at the clock, it was past 7. My father's birthday dinner at an upscale restaurant downtown was already underway. I grabbed my purse, sped across Indianapolis, and parked outside the glittering venue, my stomach churning with dread. I was late again. I smoothed my blazer, took a deep breath, and walked in, hoping to slip into the celebration unnoticed. The private dining room was alive with chatter. My parents, Daniel, and a few cousins sat around a long table, empty plates, stacked high wine bottles nearly drained. The air smelled of seared steak and garlic butter. My mother caught my eye first, her smile tight. "Abby, you made it," she said, her tone more accusing than welcoming. I apologized, citing work, but Daniel cut me off. "Always the big shot, huh?" he said, leaning back with a smirk. The cousins chuckled, and my father raised an eyebrow, sipping his wine. I forced a smile, trying to ignore the sting. I sat down, expecting to join the toast for Dad's 55th. Instead, my mother slid a leather folder across the table. "Here's the bill," she said, her voice calm but pointed. I opened it and my heart stopped. $5,500, filet mignon for 10 bottles of vintage Cabernet lobster appetizers, the works. I looked up, stunned. "You expect me to pay this?" I asked, my voice shaking. My father leaned forward, his expression serious. "Abby, you're doing so well. It's time to share your success with family." Daniel grinned, folding his arms. "That's for you, Abby," he said, his words dripping with mockery. The table burst into laughter, the sound grating against my nerves. My hands trembled as I gripped the folder. This wasn't just about the bill. It was every time I'd bailed them out, every dollar I'd sent without question, every sacrifice I'd made to keep them afloat. I thought of my dwindling savings, the house I couldn't afford, the nights I'd spent worrying about their next request. They didn't see me as family, they saw me as their solution. My mother's smile didn't waver, but her eyes were cold, expectant. Daniel's smirk widened like he enjoyed watching me squirm. Even the cousins who barely knew me joined in as if my role was a given. I wanted to scream, to flip the table, to tell them how their demands had drained me, but I didn't. I took a slow breath, my resolve hardening. "No," I said, my voice steady despite the knot in my chest. "I'm not paying this." I pushed the folder back toward my mother, the leather scraping against the tablecloth. The laughter died. My father's face hardened and Daniel's smirk vanished. "Abby, don't be selfish," my mother said, her tone sharp now. But I was done. I stood my chair, scraping the floor, and walked out, their stunned silence trailing behind me. Outside, the cool night air hit my face, but it couldn't calm the fire inside. I was furious at them, at myself, for letting it go this far. My hands shook as I unlocked my car, my mind racing with every time I'd said yes when I should have said no. This wasn't just about one dinner. It was about years of being their fallback, their safety net, their bank. As I drove away, the city lights blurring through my tears, I knew something had shifted. The next morning, my phone buzzed with 38 missed calls and angry texts. I woke up to a screen full of notifications, my heart sinking as I scrolled through them. My mother had sent a string of messages, each one sharper than the last. "Abby, how could you embarrass us like that?" one read. "You're so selfish walking out on your father's big day," said another. My father's texts were colder, more direct. "We need to talk about your attitude." Daniel, my older brother, didn't bother with texts. He'd posted a cryptic status on Facebook, "Some people forget where they came from when they get a fancy job." The post had 12 likes, including from a few cousins who'd been at the dinner. My stomach churned, not just from their words, but from the public humiliation. They were painting me as the villain, and it was working. By noon, my inbox pinged with an email from my father. The subject line read, "Family Financial Agreement." I opened it expecting an apology or at least an explanation. Instead, it was a typed document, formal and cold, outlining a plan for me to contribute $1,000 a month to support the family. My father wrote that it was my duty, given my success, to help with their expenses, groceries, utilities, even Daniel's business needs. He ended with, "We've always been there for you, Abby. It's time to give back." I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. This wasn't about love or family, it was a demand dressed up in obligation. I couldn't focus at work. My boss noticed my distraction, asking if I needed a break, but I brushed it off. The weight of their messages pressed down on me, each one a reminder of the guilt I'd carried for years. I wanted to call them to explain why I'd walked out, but their words kept echoing, selfish, ungrateful. By evening, I was a wreck, barely holding it together. I texted my boyfriend Michelle, asking to meet at a small coffee shop near my apartment. He was a bank officer, calm and steady, the opposite of my chaotic family. I needed his perspective, someone who wouldn't judge me. At the coffee shop, I spilled everything over a latte. I told Michelle about the dinner, the $5,500 bill, and how I'd pushed it back across the table. I showed him the texts, the email, Daniel's Facebook post. My voice cracked as I admitted how trapped I felt, how their demands had drained me for years. Michelle listened, his brow furrowed, not interrupting until I was done. Then he leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "Abby, this isn't about family. They're manipulating you. They're using guilt to control your wallet." His words hit like a punch. I'd never heard it put so plainly, but he was right. He pointed out how my father's email wasn't a request. It was a contract, like I owed them for existing. Michelle pulled up Daniel's post on his phone, shaking his head. "This is public shaming, Abby. They're trying to make you cave." He asked me to think about what I'd gained from giving them money, nothing but more demands. I sat there, the coffee growing cold as his words sank in. For the first time, I saw my family's actions for what they were: not love, not loyalty, but a calculated way to keep me tethered. Michelle reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "You don't owe them your life," he said. "You deserve to live for yourself." Driving home, I felt a mix of relief and anger. Relief because someone finally understood, anger because I'd let this go on so long. I deleted their texts without responding, muted their notifications, and archived my father's email. I wasn't ready to confront them again, not yet. But Michelle's words stuck with me, a lifeline in the chaos. I knew I couldn't keep living like this, always at their mercy. Something had to change, and it had to start with me. A few weeks later, I drove to my parents' house, bracing for a showdown. The two-story house in outer Indianapolis looked as tired as ever, with chipped paint and overgrown shrubs. My father had called the day before, his voice softer than usual, saying we needed to talk things out as a family. I agreed, hoping for a real conversation, but my gut told me otherwise. After weeks of their relentless texts and that ridiculous email about a monthly payment, I was ready to draw a line. I parked, took a deep breath, and stepped inside, my heart pounding like a drum. My parents and Daniel were waiting in the living room. The old couch sagged under my father's weight, and my mother sat stiffly, her hands folded tight. Daniel lounged in a chair, scrolling on his phone, barely glancing up. "Abby, good you came." My mother said, her tone clipped but trying to sound warm. My father gestured to a seat, holding a printed document, the same family financial agreement from his email. "We need to sort this out," he said, sliding it toward me. The paper outlined a plan for me to pay $1,000 a month for their expenses. I scanned it, my jaw tightening. It wasn't a discussion, it was an ambush. I pushed the paper back. "I'm not signing this," I said, my voice firm. My mother's face fell, and she launched into a lecture about family duty. "We raised you, Abby. You owe us this much," she said, her eyes narrowing. My father chimed in, his voice heavy with disappointment. You're successful because of us. Don't turn your back now." Daniel smirked, finally looking up. "Yeah, Abby, don't be so high and mighty," he said, his tone mocking. I felt the familiar guilt creeping in, but Michelle's words echoed in my mind. "They're manipulating you." I took a breath, steadying myself. "I've given you thousands over the years. Hospital bills, laptops, a new roof. When does it end?" I asked, my voice rising. My mother started to interrupt, but I kept going. "I can't keep bankrolling your lives while I'm barely holding on to mine." The room went quiet, their faces a mix of shock and anger. Then Daniel, rolling his eyes, muttered, "If Dad didn't have that $20,000 savings tucked away, maybe we'd need your money more." The words hung in the air. My father's face froze and my mother's eyes widened, shooting Daniel a look. "What savings?" I asked, my voice sharp. Daniel hesitated, realizing his mistake, but it was too late. "The account Dad's had for years," he said, trying to backtrack. "It's for emergencies, not like we're hiding it." My father cut in, his voice defensive. "It's for our future, Abby. We just wanted to test your loyalty to see if you'd step up." I stared at them, my blood boiling. $20,000 hidden while they pressured me for every cent I had. This wasn't about need, it was about control. I stood my chair, scraping the floor. "You lied to me," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "You let me drain my savings, my dreams, to test me." My mother tried to speak, her voice softer now, but I cut her off. "No, I'm done. I'm not your bank anymore." I grabbed my purse, my hands trembling, and headed for the door. My father called after me. "Abby, don't do this," but I didn't stop. Daniel shouted something about me being ungrateful, but his words faded as I stepped outside. The cool air hit my face, and I felt a rush of freedom, like a weight had lifted. But it came with pain, a deep, aching hurt. These were my parents, my brother, the people I'd loved and sacrificed for. And they'd played me, used my guilt to keep me tethered. As I drove away, tears stung my eyes, but my resolve hardened. I wasn't going back. Not this time. 1 week later, sitting in Dr. Ann Parker's office, I finally felt like I could breathe. The small room in downtown Indianapolis had warm lighting and a soft couch, a stark contrast to the chaos I'd left behind. After walking out on my family, I'd spent weeks wrestling with guilt and anger. A colleague recommended Dr. Parker, a therapist known for helping people untangle family issues. In our first session, I poured out everything: the birthday dinner, the relentless demands, the hidden savings account. Dr. Parker listened, her calm demeanor grounding me. "Your family used guilt to control you," she said, her voice steady. "They made you feel responsible for their problems." Her words echoed what Michelle had said, but hearing it from a professional hit differently. For the first time, I saw my role clearly: not a hero, but a pawn in their game of manipulation. Dr. Parker helped me unpack years of conditioning. She pointed out how my parents' expectations had wired me to prioritize their needs over mine. "Guilt is a powerful tool," she said, "but it's not your job to fix them." Each session chipped away at the weight I'd carried, replacing it with a sense of clarity. I started journaling, writing down moments when I'd felt trapped, like when I paid for Daniel's laptop or my father's hospital bills. It was painful but freeing, like peeling back layers of a wound to let it heal. Next, I met with Peggy Lewis, a financial advisor recommended by a coworker. Her office was sleek, with spreadsheets pinned to a corkboard. I brought my bank statements, embarrassed by how little I had left. Peggy didn't judge. She went through my records, her pen moving quickly, and tallied up every dollar I'd given my family: $2,000 for my father's medical scan, $1,500 for Daniel's laptop, $3,000 for the roof, plus countless smaller amounts. The total stunned me: $25,000 over 5 years. "That's a down payment on a house," Peggy said, her tone matter of fact. I felt my chest tighten, realizing how much I'd sacrificed for their demands. Peggy helped me create a budget, funneling money into savings and investments. "You're not just rebuilding your finances," she said. "You're reclaiming your future." With my finances in order, I needed something to ground me emotionally. I signed up for a yoga class at a local studio, something I'd always wanted to try but never had time for. The first session was awkward. My downward dog was more like a wobbly plank, but the instructor, a kind woman named Sarah, encouraged me to keep going. Over weeks, I got stronger, my breaths deeper, my mind quieter. I met two women in the class, Lisa and Maria, who invited me for coffee after sessions. They were nothing like my family, no expectations, no hidden agendas. We'd talk about work, hobbies, even our dreams, and I felt a spark of connection I hadn't known I'd been missing. At work, I threw myself into my role as a finance manager. My boss noticed my renewed focus, assigning me a high-profile project with a major client. I spent late nights analyzing data crafting proposals, and it paid off. A promotion to senior manager came with a raise. For the first time, I saw my career as a source of pride, not just a means to fund my family's needs. I started setting boundaries, like turning off my phone after 8 p.m. to avoid their calls. The guilt still lingered, but Dr. Parker's voice in my head reminded me, their problems aren't yours. Michelle was my rock through it all. Over dinner one night, he pulled out a notebook and helped me sketch a financial plan for the next 5 years. We mapped out savings goals, a timeline for buying a house, even a small vacation fund. You're building something for yourself now, he said, his eyes warm with pride. His support wasn't just practical, it was emotional. A reminder that I wasn't alone. We'd spend weekends hiking, laughing over coffee, or just sitting quietly, and I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. By the end of 6 months, I was a different person. The woman who'd walked out of her parents' house angry and hurt was still there, but she was stronger, more sure of herself. I hadn't spoken to my family since that day, and though it pained me, I knew it was right. My life was mine now, not a ledger for their demands, but a canvas for my own dreams. By Thanksgiving, I drove to my parents' house knowing it'd be the last time. The familiar 2-story house in outer Indianapolis loomed ahead, its chipped paint glowing faintly under the November dusk. I'd avoided their calls for months, but my grandfather Norman had asked me to come, promising a family dinner to heal things. His voice, frail but kind, was the only reason I agreed. With my new boundaries in place thanks to therapy and Michelle's support, I steeled myself for whatever awaited. I parked, clutching the pumpkin pie I'd baked, and walked into a house filled with a scent of roasted turkey and tension. The dining room was crowded with relatives, but the mood was anything but festive. My parents sat at the head of the table, their smiles forced. Daniel slouched beside them, picking at his plate. My grandfather Norman sat quietly, his weathered hands folded. I took a seat, feeling every eye on me. The conversation started innocently, talk of weather, football, but it didn't last. My mother leaned forward, her voice sweet but calculated. Abby, Daniel's car broke down. It's a big repair. We thought you could help. Daniel nodded, adding, it's only fair since you're doing so well. My stomach twisted. They hadn't changed. I set down my fork, my voice steady. I'm not paying for that. The table fell silent. My father's face reddened. Abby, this is family. You don't turn your back on us, he said, his tone sharp. My mother chimed in. You've always helped before. Don't start acting selfish now. Their words stung, but I'd heard them too many times. I started to respond, but my grandfather raised a trembling hand, silencing the room. Enough, he said, his voice firm despite his age. All eyes turned to him. Norman looked at me, his eyes warm but sad. When I was your age, Abby, I had a brother who leaned on me for money, always a new excuse, a new need. I gave until I had nothing left, and he still asked for more. It broke me. He paused, his gaze sweeping the table. You're doing to her what he did to me. She's not your bank. The room froze. My mother's face paled and Daniel shifted uncomfortably. My father opened his mouth to argue, but Norman cut him off. Let her live her life. he said, his voice cracking with emotion. I felt tears prick my eyes not just for his words, but for the weight of his own regret. I stood, my heart racing but resolute. I love you all, but I'm done being your solution, I said, looking at my parents and Daniel. I'm not coming back. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Daniel scoffed, muttering, "Good luck on your own." My father just stared, his jaw tight. I turned to Norman, squeezing his hand, and walked out, the door clicking shut behind me. The cold air hit my face, but inside, I felt a spark of freedom tempered by grief for the family I'd hoped they could be. Months later, I heard through a cousin that my parents had lost their house. Without my financial support, they couldn't keep up with the mortgage and moved to a small rented apartment downtown. Daniel, no longer propped up by my money, took a job as a warehouse worker, his business ideas fizzling out. The news didn't bring joy, it hurt knowing they were struggling. But it also confirmed what I'd suspected: they'd relied on me to avoid their own responsibilities. Meanwhile, I closed on a one-bedroom condo in a quiet Indianapolis neighborhood. The day I moved in, Michelle helped carry boxes, his laughter filling the empty space. We painted the walls a soft blue, hung photos from our hikes, and planned a small housewarming with my yoga friends Lisa and Maria. My job as a senior finance manager kept me busy, but I made time for yoga therapy and quiet evenings with Michelle. For the first time, I felt at peace, not because everything was perfect, but because my life was finally mine.